Hey guys, all right. Happy Tuesday. I hope you had a great long weekend, but we have got to get rolling with day 3 of our story. Remember, our story is On the Banks of Plum Creek, and we are focusing on our literary elements this weekend. Whew, y'all. Apparently, I did not have a long enough weekend. All right, we're focusing on character, setting, plot, and the events in our story. All right, some more amazing words for us. We've got landmarks. Yesterday, we learned that Laura and her family used landmarks to navigate their way around the new landscape. What exactly is a landmark, though? Well, a landmark is just something, an object, or a feature of a landscape or a town that is easily seen and recognized from a distance. So sometimes we use we use landmarks, when we are describing where something is. So if I was to say, well, do you know where Walmart is? And someone was like, well, no, not really. I just moved here. We could say, okay, well, what about Sam's Club? Okay, yeah, I know where Sam's Club is. Great. Walmart's right next to that. That's using our landmarks to describe our surroundings. And this is the St. Louis Gateway Arch. You can actually go up in this. That's pretty neat. A little scary, but pretty neat. Enormous. The Grand Canyon is enormous. Right off the bat, just from the sentence, I guess we can probably guess what this is, right? Enormous means very large in size, quantity, or extent. So we can have an enormous amount of something, an enormous amount of time, the extent of something, or enormous in size. Like my dog is enormous and he is only 5 months old. And so here we have a picture of an enormous cat. My goodness. All right, let's go over our vocabulary. Badger, remember, is that burrowing, flesh-eating mammal. So cute, so cute. A bank is not regions. It is the rising ground at the edge of a lake, river, or sea. And it looks like this. It's that right here where that meets and is kind of coming up. That is a bank. Bristled is short, stiff hair. And remember, we've got hedgehogs that have bristled hair. It's short and stiff. Jointed means that they are connected where two places are connected together or where they join, like your elbow, your fingers, your knee, even your ankle, where it can bend from your leg. That is jointed. Patched means to mend with a scrap of material. So if you've got a hole in your jeans or a hole in your shirt, someone might take a scrap of extra material and sew it on there or iron it on there so that it is mended and it looks real cute. Ruffled, remember, it's just material that is closely bunched together, like this skirt right here where it's closely bunched together and it looks like almost a ripple effect. That is ruffled. Rushes are long, hollow stemmed marsh plants, and they look like this. They just got those long, hollow stems. All right, going over grammar. Remember, we're talking about subjects and predicates this week. Subjects are the important word. The simple subject is the important word in a complete subject. And a simple subject can be more than one word, as in San Francisco. Remember, the subject is who or what is doing something in the sentence. So, for example, in this sentence, the dry earth slid under Laura's feet. The dry earth would be the complete subject, but the simple subject, which is the most important word out of that sentence, is just earth. Okay? And then the predicate we know is the action in the sentence. It tells us what the character or what the person in the sentence is doing, what they said, what they look like. And it is the same thing. Predicate, complete predicate, and simple predicate. The simple predicate is that very important word, and the complete predicate is all of it. So in this sentence, the dry earth slid under Laura's feet. Slid under Laura's feet is our complete predicate. Our complete predicate is going to start at that verb and then go all the way to the end of that sentence. And then the simple predicate, the dry earth slid under Laura's feet, we're going to take the most important part out of that complete predicate, which is that verb, which is the word slid. Okay? And then you know that we've got compound subjects and compound predicates. Compound subjects are two or more subjects, and compound predicates are two or more predicates. So, for example, Laura and Mary went swimming. You can't leave out Mary. You've got to include Laura and Mary, both of them. So Laura and Mary would be our compound subject because there's more than two people performing that action. And then a compound predicate, they splashed and played in the water. So they did two things, splashed and played. So we have to make sure that when we are looking at compound predicates, we include both of those because they're both important to the sentence. All right, make sure that you are studying your spelling words. They're long E and long O words. You guys have been doing great on spelling, so go ahead and keep that hard work up. And we are going to go ahead and finish reading our story. Remember, we left off and Paul was saying, don't go back without me or Mom. So let's see what happened. All the next day, Laura remembered. She remembered the cool, deep water in the shade of the tall willows. She remembered that she must not go near it. Pa was away. Mary stayed with Ma in the dugout. Laura played all alone in the hot sunshine. The blue flags were withering among the dull rushes. She went past the willow valley and played in the prairie grasses among the black-eyed Susans and goldenrod. The sunshine was very hot and the wind was scorching. Then Laura thought of the tableland. She wanted to climb it again. She wondered if she could climb it all by herself. Pa had not said that she could not go to the tableland. She ran down the steep bank and went across the lowland through the tall, coarse grasses. The tableland stood straight up and high. It was very hard to climb. The dry earth slid under Laura's feet. Her dress was dirty where her knees dug in while she held on to the grasses and pulled herself up. Dust itched on her sweaty skin, but at last she got her stomach on the edge. She heaved and rolled, and she was on top of the tableland. She jumped up, and she could see the deep, shady pool under the willows. It was cool and wet, and her whole skin felt thirsty, but she remembered that she must not go there. Okay, so she's already getting a little testy with those rules, right? Pa said I couldn't go to the water, but he didn't say I couldn't go to the tableland. So she's kind of trying to push those boundaries. The tableland seemed big and empty and not interesting. It had been exciting when Pa was there, but now it was just a flat land. And Laura thought she would go home and get a drink. She was very thirsty. She slid down the side of the tableland and slowly started back along the way she had come. Down among the tall grasses, the air was smothery and very hot. The dugout was far away, and Laura was terribly thirsty. She remembered with all her might that she must not go near that deep water. Why must she not go that deep water again? Right, Pa told her not to. Remember, it's dangerous. They were afraid she would drown. And suddenly she turned around and she hurried toward it. Uh-oh, this isn't going to end well. She thought she would only look at it. Just looking at it would make her feel better. Then she thought she might just wade in the edge of it, but she would not go into the deep water. She came into the path that Pa had made, and she trotted faster. Right in the middle of the path before her stood an animal. Laura jumped back and stood and stared at it. She had never seen such an animal. It was almost as long as Jack, but its legs were very short. Long gray fur bristled all over it. It had a flat head and small ears. Its flat head slowly tilted up and stared at Laura. She stared back at its funny face, and while they stood still and staring, that animal widened and shortened and spread flat on the ground. It grew flatter and flatter till it was a gray fur laid there. It was not like a whole animal at all, only it had eyes staring up. Slowly and carefully, Laura stood and reached and picked up a willow stick. She felt better then. She stayed bent over looking at that flat gray fur. It did not move, and neither did Laura. She wondered what would happen if she poked it. It might change to some other shape. So she poked it gently with the short stick. A frightful snarl came out of its, and its eyes sparkled mad, and fierce white teeth snapped almost on Laura's nose. Laura ran with all her might. She could run fast, but she did not stop running until she was in the dugout. "Goodness, Laura," Ma said, "you'll make yourself sick tearing around so in this heat." All that time, Mary had been sitting like a little lady spelling out words in the book that Ma was teaching her to read. Mary was a good little girl. Laura had been bad, and she knew it. She had broken her promise to Pa, but no one had seen her. No one knew that she had started to go to the swimming hole. If she did not tell, no one would ever know. Do we kind of think that sometimes? That if no one saw us do something bad and we don't tell someone, that they'll just never know? Only that strange animal knew, and it could not tell on her. But she felt worse and worse inside. That night she lay awake beside Mary. Pa and Ma sat in the starlight outside the door, and Pa was playing his fiddle. "Go to sleep, Laura," Ma said softly, and softly the fiddle sang her to sleep. Pa was a shadow against the sky, and his bow danced among the great stars. Everything was beautiful and good, except for Laura. She had broken her promise to Pa. Breaking a promise was as bad as telling a lie. Laura had wished she had not done it, but she had done it, and if Pa knew, he would punish her. Pa went on playing softly in the starlight. His fiddle sang to her sweetly and happily. He thought she was a good little girl. At last, Laura could bear it no longer. Okay, so now Laura has started to feel very what? Yes, she has started to feel so guilty because even though she didn't go into the deep water, she thought about it, and the only reason she didn't was because of that animal, right? So she is starting to feel really guilty for breaking her promise to Pa, and she doesn't want to be a liar. So let's see if she confesses. She slid out of bed, and her bare feet stole across the cool earthen floor. In her nightgown and nightcap, she stood beside Pa. He drew the last notes from the strings with his bow, and she could feel him smiling down at her. "What is it, little half-pint?" he asked her. "You look like a little ghost, all white in the dark." "Pa," Laura said in a very quivery, small voice, I started to go to the swimming hole." "You did?" Pa exclaimed. Then he asked, "Well, what stopped you?" "I don't know," Laura whispered. "It had gray fur, and it flattened out flat. It snarled." "How big was it?" said Pa. Laura told him all about that strange animal. Pa said, "It must have been a badger." Then for a long time he did not say anything, and Laura waited. Laura could not see his face in the dark, but she leaned against his knee, and she could feel how strong and kind he was. "Well," he said at last, "I hardly know what to do, Laura. You see, I trusted you. It's hard to know what to do with a person you can't trust, but do you know what people have to do to anyone they can't trust?" "What?" Laura quivered. "They have to watch them," said Pa. "So I guess you must be watched. Your Ma will have to do it because I must work at Nelson. So tomorrow, you stay where Ma can watch you. You are not to go out of her sight all day. If you are good all day, we will let you try again to be a little girl that we can trust." Okay, so Laura has confessed, which is the right thing to do, but now she has lost Pa's trust because she made the wrong decision. "How about it, Caroline?" he asked Ma. "Very well, Charles," Ma said out of the dark. "I will watch her tomorrow, but I am sure she will be good. Now back to bed, Laura, and go to sleep." The next day was a dreadful day. Ma was mending, and Laura had to stay in the dugout. She could not even fetch water from the spring, for that was going out of Ma's sight. So Mary fetched the water. Mary took Carrie to walk on the prairie, and Laura had to stay in. Jack laid his nose on his paws and waggled. He jumped out on the path and looked back at her, smiling with his ears, begging her to come out. He could not understand why she did not. Laura helped Ma. She washed the dishes and made both beds and swept the floor and set the table. At dinner, she sat bowed on her bench and ate what Ma set before her. Then she wiped the dishes. After that, she ripped a sheet that was worn in the middle. Ma turned the strips of muslin and pinned them together, and Laura whipped the new seam over and over with tiny stitches. She thought that seam and that day would never end. But at last, Ma rolled up her mending, and it was time to get supper. "You have been a good girl, Laura," Ma said. We will tell Pa so, and tomorrow morning you and I are going to look for that badger. I am sure he saved you from drowning, for if you had gone to that deep water, you would have gone into it. Once you begin being naughty, it is easier to go on, and sooner or later, something dreadful happens. So what Mom means is that once you do something bad and break the rules, sometimes it gets easier to break the rules. So once you break one, then you're like, well, what's one more? What's one more? So that's why it's very important to always make sure we're following our rules so we don't get in trouble. Yes, Ma, Laura said. She knew that now. The whole day was gone. Laura had not seen that sunrise, nor the shadows of clouds on the prairie. The morning glories were withered, and that day's blue flags were dead. All day Laura had not seen the water running in the creek, the little fishes in it and the water bugs skating over it. She was sure that being good could never be as hard as being watched. Next day she went with Ma to look for the badger in the path. She showed Ma the place where he had flattened himself on the grass. Ma found the hole where he lived. It was a round hole under a clump of grass on the prairie bank. Laura called to him, and she poked a stick in the hole. If the badger was at home, he would not come out. Laura never saw that old gray badger again. Alrighty, and that makes the end of our story for this week. Thanks for hanging tough with me, guys. I know it was a longer one. It is on your Pearson, so if you need to go back and reread it at all at any point, you do have that choice. Tomorrow is day 4, which means our test is in 2 days, so please make sure you are studying over the literary elements, your vocab, your spelling, your grammar, all that good stuff. All right, guys, keep up the great work. I love y'all, and I'll see you soon.